And so our final claim here of the corruption of the biblical manuscripts is it is useless to say the Bible is the inspired word of God when we don't have the original words.
We don't have the original words, so it's not the inspired word of God.
Right. Here's the inerrant word of God.
Useless.
You can trust it. You can be confident. Your salvation is based on it. Oh, but we don't have the original manuscripts. So
we don't have the original words.
Yeah.
So no scholar claims that we have the original manuscripts, right? The
Right.
so-called biblical autographs is what they're called, right, of the New Testament. However, acknowledging that we no longer have the autographs is different from saying we no longer have the words of the original manuscripts, right? It's also different from arguing that there never was an original that we can pursue. So just because we don't have the original doesn't mean we can't work back, right, to determine what was said. And given how many copies we have, that's what we do. Mm-hmm. That's the process that we use, right? We work back to determine what was said.
Right. Yeah, and I would highly, again, recommend viewing Bart Ehrman's debates on this, especially the one with James White, where they talk about whatever changes there are, and then this as well is, are we confident in knowing what the original manuscripts say? There's a case to be made that, yes, we do. Mm. So for Ehrman to prove we no longer have the words of the original, he would have to show that none of the variants in the available manuscript, aka the copies, go back to the original. You'd have to say that this entered into the manuscript at some time, somehow, and continued on, but it wasn't in the original.
Yeah. Again, that's a tough claim to make.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Ehrman is.
In terms of not knowing what the original, if you're claiming you don't know what the original is, then it's pretty tough to claim that this got snuck in.
It would have to say something like, and Jesus wrote on a Model T Ford. So you go, okay, well the Model T Ford wasn't until much, much later, and so there you could say that you'd have to bring in some anachronistic thing that comes into play, and that's really the only leeway that I can kind of give him for that. So Ehrman has demonstrated that particular manuscripts have been altered at certain points, but he has nowhere demonstrated that among the thousands of manuscripts available to scholars today, the original words have utterly vanished. And again, scholars regularly admit that copies have miscopied words, changes in spelling, different ways to say things in the Greek, but it's really hard to be able to put your finger on a change that is completely taken out and devoid from history. Yeah. How would you know?
Right. Well, yeah, and of course that's part of the the critical evaluation of the text, right? And that's how we get back to that. But if you're claiming that you can't know,
right,
then that's
a positive claim that you're making.
Right. Then that's the issue here, right? Ehrman hardly makes an attempt to demonstrate that we don't have the original words. Instead, he opts to make his argument by way of a theological claim, right? So this isn't a evidential claim in terms of looking at what we have. It's a theological claim, right? So what's the claim? Well, his argument can be broken down into, our authors tell us, 3 propositions, right? If God had inspired the New Testament autographs, he would have either provided us with the originals or prevented any corruption in the transmission, right, if they were inspired. The New Testament autographs no longer exist, and the available manuscripts are corrupted. Therefore, God did not inspire the New Testament autographs. There's a neat, clean argument that he's put together. Yeah. But notice, it's based not necessarily on looking at what we have, per se, to a certain extent, but it's a theological argument about what God could or did do, or what he should have done, maybe.
And so doesn't this seem like it's trading on the fact of people not knowing the transmission of the New Testament, how it came to be? This seems to be just challenging those who believe that, well, John wrote John, and then it just continued to be copied perfectly until today. And so we do have copies of it, but, it's pretty much the same thing. And that's kind of what the case is. But here he's then saying, that 1 John passage about the Trinity, that's not there. Like, okay, but my Bible has a note about that too. So it seems like people knew about it. Yeah. People who published the Bible knew about it. Okay. So, however, why should one believe position one and position one is if God had inspired the New Testament autographs, he would have either provided us with the original or prevented any corruption of the autograph or of the copies.
Yeah. So why should we believe that?
Well, Ehrman thinks this is how God would have inspired the New Testament autographs, or at least this is how Ehrman would have done it.
Oh, okay.
If I were God.
Yeah. If I were doing this, if it was up to me, this is the way I would do it. God didn't do it that way, therefore we don't have the originals, and it's all wrong.
Right. Dawkins, if I were God, I wouldn't have made the giraffe's neck like this, therefore no God exists. But the Bible does not teach that proposition 1 is true, nor does it logically follow. We are aware of no ancient Christian doctrine that claimed position 1. The proposition seems logical to Ehrman, but seeming logical is not the same as being logical. Yeah. So again, if God inspired the New Testament autographs, you couldn't change either the originals or prevent the corruption of the transmission. And so what would that mean? So okay, we have the autographs, and so you have them encased because Christians view these as important. They should be important. They tell us how to be preserved. So if you're wanting to study them as a scientist, you try to cut a piece of paper away. You wouldn't be able to do it.
That's right.
Terrorists would come in and throw a grenade in, and everything else would be destroyed, but not the text.
That's right. Or you try to copy it, and of course your hand would be forced to do exactly what it says.
Could God do that? Absolutely.
Probably,
Absolutely he could.
Yeah.
But is that how God operated the text in history? No, that's not what we see.
Again, God works with and through people, right?
Right.
And so he uses us to accomplish what he wants to accomplish, and sometimes that's kind of messy.
And continues from the Old Testament. Yeah.
So Ehrman causes confusion by not clearly distinguishing, notice this, between the original autographs, right, the manuscripts, and the original words.
Right. They are different because if you can trace from the different copies the original words, yes, you don't have the physical copies that John and Luke wrote.
The material, autographs, that kind of stuff, right? Yeah.
But, if I said, I was once 12 years old, and you wrote down, I was once 12 years old, Patrick, you have my original words, but you don't have the recording, the original recording of me. So therefore, we have to throw it out. You can't use that copy.
Yeah. Christians believe that the words written in the original autographs were inspired, not the material entity, right, that they were written on, the papyrus or the parchment, right? In other words, we don't need the original manuscripts in order to have the original words.
Right, just like how we don't today.
Yeah.
So Ehrman has produced little to no evidence that we no longer have the original words in the manuscripts available to us today. In the end, he relies on this theological argument, insisting on how God would have inspired the New Testament autographs if he had, in fact, done so. Something Ehrman himself denies. Claiming inspiration to be false because if I were running things, I would have done things differently is a far cry from the sound textual and theological arguments.
Not a good argument.
Right.
Yeah.